Hello, thank you. Welcome to this panel. We're going to try and take more audience questions and participation. I'm going to particularly call on people who are under the age of 30 or who have not spoken yet or who voted for Brexit to ask questions and make comments in this panel. I'm going to start by asking each of our panelists to come and introduce themselves. I'm Mary Fitzgerald. I edit Open Democracy.
You're not today, right?
And we'll start with you, Viv.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for staying this long. I hope we won't be bullying you during this session. My name's Viv Groskop. I'm a writer and a comedian. I'm also the host of a podcast called Dear Viv, Waving, Not Drowning, which I feel has slightly prepared me for this Brexit moment. I'm trying to get to a point where we're waving, not drowning. I just wanted to say to everyone here speaking at this therapy group for Romaniacs, I'm assuming that's what it is, that I hope this can be a moment where we do all come together and get over all this a bit. So if there is anyone in the audience who did vote leave, if you could just leave. Do you want me to set out my stall a bit?
Set out your stall, a couple of minutes on each.
Yeah, so speaking on bullying, I speak from the perspective of a woman who overuses social media. And I've tried to find a way of using it where I don't attract bullies. And the one time I slightly failed in doing this, I want to present as a salutary lesson, a cautionary tale for why we should all avoid engaging with this culture of bullying that we're going to be discussing in this section. So I didn't follow my own advice once, and I responded to a tweet from the arch bully, Piers Morgan. Yes, no, he's not popular in the room. I didn't think he would be. He tweeted on the day of the Women's March, "I'm planning a men's march to protest at the creeping global emasculation of my gender by rabid feminists. Who's with me?" I responded to this. When a female presidential candidate is recorded saying, "Just tug them by the cock," I will come with you, Piers. Thank you. He responded by retweeting this to his 5 million followers. And this was a moment for me that was weird because usually I wouldn't engage with this kind of discourse on Twitter or on any social media because using bad language, responding to these aggressors, it just brings it on. And immediately I had it all back. Lesbian, rabid feminist, bitch, Hillary supporter, apologist for Bill Clinton's rape history. All kinds of rubbish came my way from these 5 million followers. It was tens of thousands of replies, the first time that's ever happened to me. And I realized it was a moment where I had to decide, how do you respond to this bullying culture? And do you know what? Sometimes the best thing to do is ignore it and let it go. I could have had a moment of saying, well, this is so terrible, and look at me, and look at me with all my followers, and look at all these people reply. No, that's not the way to handle these people. The way sometimes is just to ignore them. One other tip for everyone wondering how to survive in this era that we're now facing, I take my inspiration from Hillary Clinton, who said memorably at the presidential debates, "I didn't just prepare for this debate, I prepared to be president." Well, I say, я не только что подготовилась к этой новому исторической эре, я выучила русский язык. I didn't just prepare for this era, I learned to speak Russian. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm Sunder Katwala. I'm director of a think tank called British Future, which is interested in how we talk about identity, integration, immigration and fairness in Britain, in the idea that we might want a more inclusive and welcoming society. So we've got a lot of work to do at the moment. But let me give you a more personal take as to where I come from on this debate about bullying, prejudice, the state of the nation. I was born in a hospital somewhere in Doncaster about 40 odd years ago between the Britain joining the European Union and the referendum to stay in. My dad had come to this country from Baroda, Gujarat, India, to be a doctor. My mum had come from Cork in Ireland to be a nurse. They met up somewhere in a hospital. Pretty unpopular idea with both of their families, this being 1970 and attitudes being a bit different then, but there we are. And Britain's changed a lot in those 40 years, you know, mobile phones, the internet and so on. And we got a lot less racist and prejudiced as a country. And I could cite all sorts of facts and figures and studies at you. It's just my lived experience, though, that happened, because as a 7-year-old, I was kind of sports mad. Cricket a bit, which is my dad's game, mainly football, the Olympics and so on. So for sort of 3 or 4 years, I sort of badgered to be allowed to go to football matches in, you know, 1981, 1982, this was. And by the time I was 12, I was the proud holder of a season ticket at Everton Football Club in Liverpool. We didn't have any black players or anything. I didn't notice that particular thing until, you know, Arsenal turned up with 4 black players, and we all noticed that day in terms of just the style of overt public racism that thousands of people were shouting when you've got your season ticket in the family enclosure, watching the football. And if I take my 7 or 8 year olds to, we've been to women's football so far, but if I took them to a football match, we just wouldn't hear that, because it changed. The type of conversation behind the goal in the school playground, what is banter, what is bullying, it's just changed a lot over those years, and I'm keeping that progress, and I'm very determined we do keep that progress, because the question on the ballot paper, which a majority of people chose to vote leave, was, should we leave the European Union or not in 2016, 2017, 2018? Not, do you want to live in 1972 again? And that's how most people answered the question. And if you think it was about, do you want to live in 1972 again, and a sliver of people did, 17 million people didn't, then those people need to be disappointed, because we're not going back. But we didn't make the progress we made behind the goal, or in the playground, in the workplace, in trade unions. We didn't make it because of some shared European project where Belgium, Italy, France, Britain all moved together at the same pace on these issues. I mean, that isn't what happened. Actually, it happened here. And we're keeping that progress here. And there are some challenges, I think, about how we do that and how we would risk getting that wrong. And the biggest point I want to make today is that defending that progress absolutely is not a project of the 48% against the 52% in this country, because I'm interested in our majority norms against prejudice in the street, in the bus, online. I'm interested in a 75% project, a 90% project, a 99% project. So if the 48% want projects about soft Brexit or what people put on buses or anything else, knock yourselves out. But you're not having challenging racism as a project for, you know, the 48%, and you're especially okay if you vote Liberal Democrat or Green and have got an Amnesty International Twitter, but the rest of the country are racist oiks that you're afraid of. It's about having a debate that is open to the debates that people want to have about immigration and whether it's too high or not, about integration and what's going right and what's going wrong, and showing what is permitted before we draw a red line against prejudice and what isn't permitted. And I think our tribe is getting quite bad at that at the moment, and feels like saying, if they've called a culture war, we're ready to fight one. I want to depolarize a culture war and not to fight one.
Thank you. Amy, will you introduce yourself and talk about your experience and also potential solutions?
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Amy Longland, and I am Programme Partnerships Lead at My Life, My Say, which is a youth engagement charity based in Paddington. That's one of my hats. I'm also Vice Coordinator for the European Society, and I'm also the National Co-Chair for Youth for Europe, so I wear a few hats. And I'm here today to kind of talk about young people and my experience as a young person as well. So I have a campaigning background. I started up a campaign group in Nottingham, Students for Europe, and I grew that campaign group from 2 people to over 400. It was quite successful, obviously we won mini battles, but not the whole war, unfortunately. But I have personal experience of what I think Bully Britain really is, and I have experience of our opposing group on campus using bullying tactics in the campaign. As Nick Clegg has said in the speech before, in really hyper-aggression, really intimidating. They would come along to events that we'd organise and just to kind of sabotage them. And I found as well, from campaigning out in Nottingham, where I studied in the local areas, that I experienced a lot of anger and abuse when I was on the ground as well. So I think it's important to acknowledge that those kind of narratives did happen during the referendum. And obviously it's not the case in every university, but when I think of Bully Britain, I think of my campaigning background and what I experienced, and especially as a young female as well. And actually the campaigns themselves, we can all agree that on both sides, they're incredibly aggressive. There's a lot of mudslinging, a lot of post-factual nature of the campaign, but that's stating the obvious. We all know that, I suppose. And obviously after the referendum, hate crime was through the roof. So we have to accept that, this was a really kind of poisonous referendum campaign, and that's something that we have to kind of come to terms with now. And for me, working with young people now in my role at My Life, My Say, that's something that I'm really finding that is disillusioning young people. So the referendum for me really exposed divisions in this country along lots of different lines, but especially age. And that's something that I'm really pleased to be here today, representing a young person on the panel. I'd have liked to see more young people. Obviously, it's great you're all here, but it would have been great to see some more young people here today, because I do feel as though young people from my work, young people are resentful, and they do feel as though that their future's been taken away from them, and they do feel as though the older generations voted on behalf of the younger generations. Whether that is true or not is a different story, but that's how yet they feel. Thank you. So, through my work in My Life, My Say, a lot of it is, as I said, about engaging with young people. We have lots of outreach events where we create safe spaces, usually in cafes, for young people to talk about their views. And a lot of them reject the idea, and I reject the idea personally, that young people are apathetic and that they didn't turn out in the referendum because they don't care and therefore they don't matter. Because actually it's a systemic issue where young people have been continuously overlooked in campaigns and in the referendum, even in the general election and the referendum. In June, for students, exam period, not going to get them to turn out and vote. They're away travelling, and it was really frustrating for me from my campaigning background, and now speaking to young people in my job, their frustrations and how they feel completely misinformed and completely overlooked and as if they don't matter. So next week we have National Conversation Week, and we're trying to kind of bring young people together across the UK and to try and encourage them to register to vote and turn out. Because as a young person myself, from my campaigning and now, it's something I'm passionate about, trying to get my peers to register and turn out, and to try and encourage them to, stand up and demand a say, because a lot of them feel as though they really, really don't matter at all. And I get that. The campaign itself in the referendum was really poisonous. And as a young person, if you're looking at the campaign and you see politicians mudslinging, flip-flopping from one side to the other, post-factual nature of it, you're looking, people are asking you to vote. You're not going to. It doesn't represent young people. So I think now we need to really come together. We need to move past this, and we need to try and ensure that young people aren't completely disillusioned. It doesn't matter whether you voted Leave, Remain, or you didn't vote, or you couldn't vote, which is a whole argument in itself. But what matters now is we have to come together, and we have to really try and encourage young people to register and turn out to vote, so that they don't become completely disillusioned forever, I think.
Thank you, Amy. I think before we turn it over to questions, there's one thing to note. I appreciated your longer arc of history perspective. Yes, there's been a doubling of hate crime in certain parts of the UK since the referendum result, but that's a spike that is actually anomalous, or it's going in the wrong direction when you think about the broader sweep of history. I feel like this conversation is really a conversation about power at every level. we talk about hate speech, and we talk about how this is, it's typically characterized as frustrated teenagers and angry men in their rooms in the dark, shouting abuse at people on Twitter. But actually, the powers that be are organizing forms of hate speech on a massive scale against Muslims, against immigrants, against saboteurs. This is in our discourse all the way up and all the way down. And you can define hate speech. There's a strict legal definition of hate speech, but then there's a wider culture.
Arguably, having a prime minister who keeps coming up in your face and repeating "strong and stable, strong and stable, strong and stable" is in itself a form of hate speech.
And we have a president of the United States who's a Twitter troll. Right? There's this old, if you work in media, it's one of the first things you get taught is don't feed the trolls, which was your point. Do not engage with people who want to draw you down dark holes of abuse. And yet, so we've had that maxim for a long time, and yet we have the leader of the free world, supposedly, who is a Twitter troll. So I suppose there's that element of power. So I think there's also I can see some instrumentalism in the argument that, oh, well, it's this noisy, uncontrollable rabble out there online who need to be managed and controlled, and who shouldn't be allowed to speak their mind because it will end in anarchy and racism and abuse. I think we have to think about it much more structurally. The whole of our society, our government, our media. Where's this coming from? Where is these instincts and opinions and discourse coming from? I'd like particularly to talk about solutions in this conversation. I run Open Democracy, which is a global non-profit website, and we are very pro-free speech, and we have radically different opinions published on our site every day, passionately held beliefs from people from all sides of a political argument or debate. And yet we have quite a strict commenting policy, which is not just you aren't allowed to abuse people and you aren't allowed to commit hate crime, but you're not allowed to personally attack anyone on Open Democracy. If you do, your comment will be removed. It doesn't have to be abusive language. If you stray off the point, or if you're attacking someone's motives or questioning their honesty or their, unless you're correcting a fact, if you're questioning their honesty and you're being ad hominem, then you can't play in our park, in our playground. We were talking beforehand about how perhaps not allowing commenters to be anonymous on so many forums would be an interesting way of challenging people to say things online that they would be happy to say in person and in public as well. So it feels as though there are many things we can do to empower people to move conversations in directions that are more respectful, more honest, more open, and more tolerant, despite the structural problems we're talking about. I'd love to hear just comments from the rest of the panel on other things we might be able to do, and then we'll open it up to the audience.
As I've already suggested, I think it's very difficult to organise something in a collective way that fights back against this aggressive bullying discourse that's become part of the way we talk, the way we interact with each other online, and also the way that both mainstream and online media speaks to us. There's an amazing book that's just come out this week called Irresistible by an American writer called Adam Alter, which gives a lot of really alarming information, statistics and reports about how we interact with the internet and our over-engagement digitally. And for me, this book really suggests that the answer really comes down to us on one level as individuals. Adam Alter talks about the fact that we have a slot machine in our pocket now, most of us, that's always feeding us this information. And we have a decision as to how we respond to that and how we engage with it. He quotes some research from China that examined interactions on social media and tried to find out what are the most prevalent emotions that we share. And the emotion that goes viral the quickest is anger. It's way above sadness, joy, disgust. Anger is the most prevalent one. And I think that's a real indication of just how bullying and aggressive this discourse has become, not just in this country, but globally. And I really feel it's down to us as individuals to figure out how we interact with this and not become part of feeding that system. So not constantly retweeting some really irritating Daily Mail front page, because we all know that front page is designed to spread fear and hate. It's trying to step back and think how we're going to interact with this positively and engage with each other positively. I'd love to know if anyone has more collective solutions than that, but I think the answer is the most supreme self-control around devices that any of us can muster.
Would you, knowing what you know now, would you have responded to Piers Morgan in the way that you did?
I knew what I was doing at the time and I felt strongly, so I was okay with it. But I wouldn't necessarily do it again. And I think a lot of people who complain about abuse online, they do feed these trolls. And guess what? They come back and bite you.
I'd like to draw a bit of a distinction between the online and the offline, because I think both really matter, but there's something quite important. I mean, it's Tweetaholics Anonymous. I tweet too much as well. At Sunder says, if you want to disagree with me afterwards. But it's quite important because I'm pretty sure, as I've already told you, that I live in a less racist society than the one I grew up in. And yet I do experience more racism today than I used to, because it's almost 20 years since anyone was racist to me in my face in person on a bus, you know, in Shooters Hill or in Eltham. But I will get racism just online. The barriers to entry are lower. You know, you used to have to get your pen and a stamp and send something off to a columnist, send them a green ink letter. The email's there, the Twitter's there. So that is dangerous, and we have to police that culture. I think gender makes a big difference here, because actually I think the level of anger and abuse towards women is just anger and more violent. So I get the type of troll that I do slightly sometimes feed because of what I'm doing. I don't get very violent, angry racists on Twitter. I get semi-intelligent racists who think they can win an argument with you. And I'm quite interested in that argument and how they get on, because they always start with things like Sunder Katwala, director, British Future, tells you all you need to know, doesn't it? To which I say, well, yeah, but what does it tell you? Out of interest, just to see what it tells us, because I'm quite interested in where people have got a sense of loss and dispossession and anger there. I'm quite interested in whether they want to have a conversation about what we should do now. I'll say, but what should we do now? You know, or you're not British or English, Sunder. I'll be like, but my kids, what about my kids? You know, they've got an Indian grandparent, 2 Irish grandparents, English grandparent, in, out, you know, what are the terms? It's quite interesting to me about what those people do, and actually they behave more civilly, that kind of person. That's not the kind of person where you're thinking of calling the police, or, you know, your partner's saying to you, get off Twitter, stop doing it, you'll get someone into trouble. So the online culture is quite important. And I think it's quite interesting about what debates people feel they haven't been allowed to have, and actually saying, this debate is really on, but actually we're going to police this boundary over here. And then the offline debate. And the offline debate, I think, is a different challenge about the bubbles we live in as well, offline as well as online. I'm really interested in what London, Manchester, Oxford, Cambridge, the university towns and centres, the centres of metropolitan tolerance and Remainism, I'm interested in what they do now. Do they cast themselves as islands of tolerance in an oikish country that they don't want anything to do with? Or actually, do they engage locally with people 5 miles up the road, 10 miles up the road, 3 miles across Norwich, from Norwich to East Anglia, from Manchester to Wigan, from one side of London to the other? Why is it that so many people don't know anybody who voted on the other side of the referendum except their in-laws, when, you know, you're not meant to mention it on Sunday lunch? Part of the answer is actually meeting people in real life, not that they'll convert you or you'll convert them, but actually to get a non sort of caricatured version of what real people who thought differently from you were thinking.
And that's part of our project on open democracy. We're actually going to be filming encounters between people from radically different backgrounds and just posting them online to show people where those conversations can lead to. You just reminded me of something I did when I was interning at The Observer. I got sent to the BNP's local election conference. I was the only journalist in the entire room, which was something like a Ku Klux Klan meeting. And Nick Griffin asked me to stand up and take a bow for being the only journalist there. And I interviewed him afterwards in a pub car park in Dagenham, and he you know, went on, and I sort of humoured him. I didn't look disgusted with his answers, and I let him feel like I was vaguely on side. He certainly was under that impression after a while, even though I didn't say anything. And I said he talked about how he wanted to halve the population of Britain, and you know, I asked some questions about that. In the end, I said, and he defined, you know, who was British, and, you know, at what point you came to this country, whether or not you could be sent back. And so it went on and on. Obviously, I sound very British, but I'm American. And I said at the end of the interview, I said, oh, well, Nick, would you allow me to stay in the country then? And he said, well, of course I would. I said, but I'm American. I wasn't born in this country. I came here in the late 1980s. And he said, oh, well, you've clearly culturally assimilated, so yes, you can. And I just, without planning to, burst into laughter. I just couldn't stop laughing at him. And it wrong-footed him, I think, more. It was completely uncalculated. He had no idea what to do with that. He was so used to making people feel angry that having this 21-year-old laugh in his face was probably the most empowering thing I could have done for everyone who I was angry on behalf of. So, I mean, it relates to some of these points about in-person communication, being human, not feeding the trolls, and just finding different ways to engage with people or to refute their arguments. I'll come to you now just for thoughts about potential solutions.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to kind of tap into some of the things that were said as well, and I do think that face-to-face discussion is obviously incredibly important. But you can't forget that there are certain channels that young people use nowadays that are online, and we're a very technical generation. We do a lot of things online. So one thing that I thought was reassuring was how lots of groups came out after the referendum that were solidarity groups on Facebook, where people came together and they used Facebook as a medium to kind of discuss things and talk about things and try and have that solidarity. And in that regard, it's very reassuring. But young people voice their frustrations, especially young people that don't feel listened to in everyday life. They voice their frustrations online. Young people use social media, they use Twitter, they use the internet to get all their information, and they use the internet to talk about things. So yes, talking face-to-face is important, but when you think about young people today, a lot of what we do, a lot of the way we converse with one another, and especially because we often have friends that we've met that have moved away and done things, that's how we keep in touch. But I think, and someone touched upon it, it is important that we try not to be in this bubble. I'm guilty of it as well. I know that on my Facebook, I just have all people that think the same way as me, and I've liked pages with the same views as me, and I've kind of deleted anyone that comes out with some racist comment. And that creates a bubble where I think, oh, everybody agrees with my views. Everyone wants us back in the EU and thinks this and that. And it's okay, it's fine for me when I'm scrolling through my news feed, but that creates a bubble where you think everyone agrees with you. So when you do encounter an opposing view, it can often lead to aggression or, something along those lines. So it's really important that we move out of that bubble and we try and actually address other people's views and take them head on and talk about it. So that's why in terms of solutions, I think it's really important that we actually expose ourselves. Today this is a great conference, but we all have, most of us have similar views. It's important that we do talk to one another and we discuss things and we try and move past aggression and the poisonous wave of the referendum and actually just discuss things person to person.
And on that note, I want to open up. I don't see anyone queuing up by the microphones, but if anyone does want to say anything, this is absolutely the moment. Oh, I see. People are now, jumping at the microphones. Brilliant.
Oh, let this young lady speak, Mary. Let the young lady at the back speak first.
Yeah, where's the... Yes, so she will get... Yeah.
Hi, I was going to ask you a question earlier, and you said that I could. So. Some people have recognised me here today because I post way too much online. And I draw cartoons, and I write storybooks, and I write songs. And I wrote a song recently that's called Strong and Stable. And just a little bit of it goes like this. Theresa May likes things to have a label. They're either weak and chaotic, or they're strong and stable. She likes to label children with the country that they're born in, because we all know she'll be racist when she's able. And as you can imagine, that doesn't always get very positive responses from a lot of the groups that I post in. And recently I've had a huge amount of trolling from not just people that leave really abusive comments. I've had people making rape threats against me. And then other people making really kind of personal attacks that I'd actually added to my friend list because I thought that it would be healthy to kind of have a debate with them. There was a reasonable amount of debate, and then they start to get personal attacks, and they'll send me things like pictures of their dual passports and sort of taunt me for the fact that they've got dual nationality and they voted Brexit because they're trying to take away our rights. So I was just thinking about potential solutions for this. You know, you either block them out completely, which I have done on quite a number of people. Somebody else suggested reporting them to police or online communities, you know, bodies that can deal with it. Some people just suggest like removing comments, being able to comment on posts. And part of me thinks that that's actually stopping the debate and the discourse. And do we need to be having these conversations with people, or you know, should we just be blocking them out? I don't think creating this bubble is necessarily a helpful thing, and maybe provoking a reaction and making the point that we don't agree and we want our voices heard is more important, and you have to learn to just ignore or deal with the trolls.
Thank you. Over here.
Hello. So I'm a young person, I'm 17, and I talk to a lot of my friends about what they feel angry about, and I find a lot of them, they take their things that they feel are unjust and then they completely flip them around. So take the EU referendum, a lot of my friends are annoyed that 16-year-olds couldn't vote, so afterwards they're like, we should have another one where 6-year-olds could vote, but also anyone over 65 shouldn't be allowed to vote. So when does this...
I agree with that.
So when do we go from feeling unjust and wanting it to be right, first then sweeping it over and just wanting someone else to feel punished for what we're not getting?
Yeah.
We'll get two more and then we'll...
I think we need to be very proactive about community cohesion, and I think we need to find ways to defuse some of the toxic things that come out there. You know, like patriotism has become this really sort of toxic add-on, you know. I started using peaceful patriot of the planet, and all of a sudden it stopped being toxic. You know, we need to think creatively like that. And one of the ideas I have for young people who must be feeling incredibly frustrated, the 16 and 17-year-olds, the EU citizens who weren't allowed to vote in the EU referendum despite the huge impact it's going to have on their lives. What I wanted to do was to put a package together which says, you know, an envelope that says, you know, I'm not allowed to vote, or, you know, I'm not eligible to vote. And then you open up the package and it's got a list of, you know, some spaces there. Get these people, the 16 and 17-year-olds, the EU citizens, get them to go out and try and sign up people who are eligible to vote that aren't quite committed and haven't even registered yet. Use that energy, that anger and that energy, use it to get them out there petitioning other people to come in, register to vote, and then they will feel a little bit empowered.
Thank you. I'm being told we have less than 5 minutes left, so I'm just going to we're not even going to respond, we're just going to let people speak for the next 5 minutes. So you, and then you.
Well, I was going to ask you a question,
okay.
but that's fine.
We can talk afterwards.
I'm a psychologist, and I've worked a lot with victims of bullying, all sorts of victims of bullying. And what strikes me about all of them that they have in common is that they've all been bullied by somebody more powerful than them. And the most successful bullies are also offering something. So just to go to one of our most successful bullies ever was Jimmy Savile. But he was offering something at the time that was appealing to enough people to keep him in that position of power. Now, the other thing that I'm struck by is that we know many of our children who end up being our leaders are going to schools where they are being bullied. They're being bullied by headmasters, teachers, sports instructors, etc., etc. There's a book out at the moment by Alex Renton, I think his name is, about being bullied in boarding schools. He went to the same school as Boris Johnson. So they're being bullied. They are therefore likely to have a model of either being a bully or being a victim of a bully. And they talk about it as if they're good leaders and good managers. I'm very interested in the panel's view as a solution, and it's a long-term one, unfortunately, really, really working on schools and getting paedophiles and other forms of bullies out of schools, especially in the boarding schools or the schools where our apparent leaders are going to go.
Thank you. Yeah. One more.
Hi, good afternoon.
One more.
Me? Her? No, I was just going to ask the question. I was wondering what the panel thought, whether there should be any limitations on freedom of speech, and if indeed there should be, where should they be?
We have to wrap it up, but we can continue this conversation over coffee and a drink later.
Should be a second referendum.
Yes.
That's not the subject of this panel. Thank you very much, everyone. Yeah.